the more structured you can make your Instagram stories, the more likely you are going to keep people hooked on your story from the beginning right through to the end. And when you do that, when you keep people engaged on your Instagram stories, that tells the Instagram algorithm that your content is valuable and it pushes you further up the story feed for your followers. Hi YouTube and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're talking all about how you can increase views on your Instagram stories. So just before I get into the good stuff, don't forget to hit the subscribe and bell button so that you never miss a new video when it drops every single week. I talk all about Instagram marketing on this channel. Don't forget that you can get your hands on my free guide, a month worth of Instagram story prompts and scripts and ideas, so that for the next month and the next few months, to be honest, because you can repurpose loads of the ideas within that guide, you don't have to think about what you're going to share on Instagram stories. There's a whole load of scripts, ideas, prompts in there. So get your hands on that. I've put a link in the description box below and in the first comment below this video. Stay tuned to the end of this video where I'm going to give you a calculation that you can start using to measure the success of your Instagram stories, and so that you know whether your Instagram strategy is working or not by figuring out how many people that view your Instagram stories are staying tuned right through to the end of your Instagram stories. So tip number one is super simple. Make sure that any stories you are uploading where you are speaking face to camera are subtitled. Now, if you do want to use an app that subtitles your stories, then you can download the app Threads by Instagram. This is a recent app which will actually subtitle what you're saying on stories word for word. Me personally, I don't actually like to subtitle every single word I say because frankly, there are some words I say, sometimes I sometimes I are, and I don't want every single word to be subtitled. I don't think that's necessary all the time. So most of the time, I actually prefer to just film my Instagram stories, and any shots or videos where I'm talking face to camera, I will then, just before I upload the story, I will go in and just add one or two sentences that summarize what it is I'm saying. What are the key points that I want people to take away from me speaking face to camera? That is all you need. It doesn't need to be word for word, but just give people context so that they know what's going on and they stay tuned to keep watching the entirety of that story. So tip number two is to keep your Instagram stories short. Research came out last year in 2019 that actually found that the optimum length for an Instagram story is 6 slides. Can you believe that? 6 slides? I actually couldn't believe that. And actually, it's funny that I couldn't believe it because I know from my own personal experience, anecdotally, that I don't love to watch loads and loads of slides in a story. I don't know if you've ever had it, but if you open up somebody's Instagram story and the dashes along the top of that story that show how much content is it within that story, if those dashes are dots, i.e. there's a lot of content within that story, I personally want to swipe away, and I'm certainly not going to stay tuned throughout that entire story because it's just too much content, it's too overwhelming. And clearly that is the case for lots of other people because this research has shown that short stories are best. So if you can, keep your stories short and succinct. If you find that you are needing to use loads of individual slides to tell your story and to get your point across, it probably means that you could afford to be a bit more succinct and get to the point much more. And definitely don't leave your juicy tips or the juicy takeaway of that story right to the end of a really long story because most people aren't going to get there. You'll always have drop off with views. That is normal, that is natural. But the shorter you can keep your Instagram stories, the more likely you will keep people hooked throughout. So tip number 3 is the most important tip. And if you walk away from this video with nothing else but this tip, then I feel like I've done a good enough job with this video. Tip number 3 is to make sure that your Instagram stories are structured. They should be structured like a story. Like any good book, film, fairy tale, your stories should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, Bella, what do you mean when you say a beginning, a middle, and an end? And I really don't want you to overthink this. It is as simple as just structuring your stories so that they have a bit of a narrative arc. So I'm going to put on the screen here an example from the fashion retailer Boden. And the reason I love to use this story as an example is not because you need to copy the exact format of this story, i.e. you need to copy what it looks like and all the graphics that they use, because This is a very well-designed Instagram story, and it clearly is using software like Adobe or Canva or something else. You don't need to get fancy with your technology or your software. But what you do need to take from this example is the principle of telling a good story. So in this Instagram story, they open the story by saying, the Bowden Book Club, today we're going to share the founder and his daughter, we're going to share their book recommendations. So they open that story just by letting us know what we can expect, that we are about to see some really great book recommendations from the people behind Bowden. And then the middle of that Instagram story, we get the recommendations. They share those book recommendations. And then at the end of the story, they wrap up by saying, are there particular books that you believe everybody should read? And they include the question sticker so that their community have the opportunity to put their recommendations into that question sticker. They have the opportunity to be involved and to interact and to share their thoughts. So that is a really lovely example of a short and sweet and succinct story that has that structure, that has that beginning, middle and end. And the benefit of structuring your stories loosely in this way with a bit of a narrative thread is that you are going to keep people engaged because it comes down to psychology. The human brain reacts really well to structure, particularly a three-part structure. It's why we love stories, because that is the oldest three-part structure maybe in the whole world. So if you can play to what the human brain wants, if you can really play to the psychology of the three-part structure and telling that story that has that really satisfying beginning, middle and an end, you are more likely to keep people engaged. If you compare that to a random assortment of images and videos uploaded through the day, the problem with that is that there is no cohesiveness, there is no through line with that content. And what that means is that people aren't going to know where that story is going. They're going to lose the thread of what's going on, and they're likely to swipe away from that story. That brings me on to tip number 4. As much as possible, make the beginning of your Instagram story really juicy. Now, when I say juicy, I just mean make it captivating, make it attention grabbing. Again, you have to remember that when people are swiping through their Instagram stories, a lot of people are fairly sedated. I like to call them the sedated swipers, because depending on where you fall in the feed of their Instagram stories, you may be the 6th or 7th or 8th story in their feed. They are going to be sedated, they're going to be swiping through, and they're just going to be letting content wash over them. If you want people to sit up and listen and really take note of the story that you are sharing, then grab their attention. Make the beginning of your story juicy. Ask a question, make a controversial statement that relates to the rest of the story, or include an interactive sticker at the beginning of your story to get people's buy-in and get them interacting really early on so that they're more likely to want to continue watching the story because they have had that interactivity, they've had that involvement right from the beginning. And that brings me on to tip number 5. Make the most of Instagram story stickers. The poll sticker, the question sticker, the quiz sticker, the DM sticker, these are all your secret weapons, and you may have been using them from time to time already, but I really want you to start using them fairly often as you can without overwhelming people, and using them really strategically. So next time you go to plan an Instagram story or you go to upload an Instagram story, think about how you can include a poll sticker, a question sticker, a quiz sticker. Think about how you can include that within your story so that you can increase interactivity, so that you can get your community, you can get your followers involved in the story early on, and therefore increase the retention rate, increase the percentage of people that start watching your stories and stick around right through to the end. Now, where main feed content, I really suggest planning at least 2 weeks in advance. You don't need to plan in advance that much with Instagram stories. But what I do recommend doing is maybe on the Sunday night before the week ahead or the Monday morning of a new week, I suggest roughly outlining what stories you're going to share throughout the week. I recommend, if you can, sharing between 4 and 5 Instagram stories per week. Maybe that means you share one story every business working day, or maybe you like to share some stories on the weekend as well. But aim for 4 or 5. And on that Sunday night or Monday morning, just roughly outline what they will look like. It doesn't need to take you a lot of time, it can take you 10 minutes, but by knowing what you're going to share ahead of time and by roughly outlining the beginning, the middle, and the end of each of those stories, you are much more likely to create an Instagram story that is going to keep people captivated from the beginning right through to the end. It will also take the overwhelm out of knowing what you're going to share on Instagram stories when you actually come to do it. And again, it may not feel like you're spending that much time thinking of an Instagram story and then creating the content and then hitting share. But I promise you that if no planning or no thinking ahead of time is going into those stories, then you will be collectively spending a lot of time and energy trying to think up what to share, then creating the story, then publishing it. And because you haven't thought about it ahead of time, it's likely that those stories won't always be structured that well. They won't always have that beginning, middle, and end. And that is going to harm your retention rate. That is going to harm your views and the amount of people that are opening up your story at the beginning and actually sticking with you right through to the end. Now, just before I wrap up this video, I wanted to give you a calculation so you can figure out your retention rate with your Instagram stories. Now, what is retention rate, you are wondering? Retention rate is the percentage of people that view your stories and stay watching your story from the beginning right through to the end. So to figure out your retention rate of your stories, what you do is you go into your Instagram Insights, you filter your Instagram stories by reach. And remember, Instagram story insights disappear after 14 days. So you want to make sure you're doing this at least once a week. Go into your insights, filter by reach, and then find the first slide of that Instagram story. You will know which the first slide of a recent story was, especially if you're outlining them ahead of time. This will be very, very easy to figure out. So go to that beginning opening story slide and make a note of the reach number. And then go to the final slide in that story and make a note of that reach number. Obviously, the reach number on the first slide will be more than the reach number on the last slide. That's absolutely fine. There will always be some drop off, but we're really trying to close the gap between that first reach number and that last reach number as much as possible. And when you structure your Instagram stories, this is how you start to close that gap. So now you have those two numbers. This is the calculation. You want to multiply the reach number of your last Instagram story slide by 100 and then divide that number by the reach number of your first Instagram story slide. And that will give you a percentage. And the more frequently you check your retention rate of your Instagram stories, the more familiar you will get with what is a good retention rate for you. And every time you go to figure out that retention rate, really analyze the content of that story. Was there something about that story that made the retention rate better than before? Was it more structured? Were there more Instagram stickers involved? Or if the retention rate is worse than previously, were there things that you could have done differently? Was the Instagram story maybe too long? Was it fairly random? Was there not that much structure to it? This is how you can really start to take control of your Instagram story insights, and you can start to really feel empowered to know what is working, what isn't, and you actually have a metric to start improving upon. That's all for this week's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to hit the subscribe and bell button if you haven't already, so you never miss a new video all about Instagram marketing when it drops every single week. I will see you next week for a brand new video, but just before I do, don't forget to check out this video here, which is all about your Instagram strategy for 2021. And this video up here, which is about Instagram's latest feature, Instagram guides, how to create them. And I've also got loads of ideas for you as well. I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.